the dark that knows you're named. Darkness is not the absence of light. That's the lie people tell themselves so they can sleep. Darkness is a place where light used to be. A memory of shape, a suggestion of form. And when it stays empty for too long, it starts wondering what it would feel like to be full. The night everything changed began quietly. No sirens, no alerts, no warnings buzzing on phones. At exactly 12:14 a.m., every light in the city shut off at once, as if reality itself had blinked. Evan Mercer was standing in his bathroom, rinsing toothpaste from his mouth, when the overhead light vanished. The mirror went black so suddenly that for half a second he thought his eyes had failed. Then the dark settled in, not distant. It pressed close, like a held breath. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It had texture, weight. It pressed against his ears until he became aware of his own heartbeat, too loud, too fast, like it didn't belong in the room. Evan reached for his phone. Before his fingers touched the screen, the flashlight turned on by itself. The beam cut forward in a narrow cone, but stopped less than 6 feet from his hand. The light didn't fade. It was swallowed. Evan frowned and waved the phone slowly side to side. The beam moved. The darkness didn't react. That was the first moment he felt it. Not fear, attention. He stepped into the hallway. The carpet muted his footsteps, but the sound arrived late. A fraction of a second behind the movement. Enough to notice. Enough to make his stomach tighten. His shadow stretched along the wall ahead of him, then stopped. Ivan took another step. His shadow moved after him, delayed, as if it needed time to decide where Ivan was supposed to be. "That's not right," he whispered. The words didn't echo. They didn't travel. They felt absorbed the same way the light had. The hallway felt aware, not hostile, curious. A knock sounded from his neighbor's door. 3 soft taps, perfectly spaced. Evan hesitated. Every instinct told him not to open his door. Something deep and old warned him that once he did, something would understand him better. The knock came again. Evan opened the door. His neighbor stood in the hallway. Her posture was normal. Her clothes were normal. Her face looked unfinished. Not missing. Incomplete. Features blurred together as if someone had started shaping them and stopped halfway through. Eyes suggested but not defined. A mouth that couldn't decide on an expression. She tilted her head. "Did it see you yet?" she asked. Her voice was calm, familiar. That terrified him more than if she had screamed. Evan swallowed. What's wrong with your face?" She raised a hand and gently touched where her cheekbone should have been. "It's borrowing," she said. "Just learning how things fit." The darkness behind her shifted, not spreading, leaning, like it was listening through her. "Don't let it study you all at once," she added. "It likes continuity." Then she stepped backward. The dark closed around her, smooth and silent, like a mouth remembering how to swallow. The hallway was empty again. The door closed on its own. Evan stumbled backward, heart hammering. His phone vibrated. Unknown number. "Don't let it see your face. Don't stand still too long. Don't move too fast." A pause. Another message appeared. "It learns fastest when you try to survive. Battery, 13%. The apartment felt smaller. Not physically, intentionally. The corners felt closer. The ceiling heavier. Shadows thickened as if they were folding inward, mapping him, memorizing distances. Evan moved toward the living room. Every step felt recorded, not watched, cataloged. The television screen reflected him faintly. The reflection lagged, just enough. Then it smiled. Evan didn't. The smile adjusted itself, tried again. Softer, more accurate, like it was practicing. Evan ripped the television's power cord from the wall. The screen went black. The reflection stayed for half a second longer than it should have. Somewhere inside the apartment, the darkness shifted again. Satisfied, learning, Evan backed away until his shoulders hit the wall. He pressed his palms against his face, suddenly terrified of being seen too clearly. From the center of the room, a pressure built, not a sound, a presence, and inside his skull, perfectly pronounced, Evan. His knees nearly buckled. The voice was flawless, not an imitation, a match. Evan screamed. The darkness reacted instantly. The pressure surged. The walls seemed to bow inward, as if the room itself were leaning closer to hear him better. The voice returned, now wearing his voice, repeating his scream with perfect emotional timing. Evan dropped to the floor. He remembered the rule from the message, don't stand still, but movement felt like feeding it. So he did something worse. He became boring. He slowed his breathing, flattened his thoughts, let emotions dissolve into nothing. No panic, no hope, no identity. The darkness circled him, confused, hungry. At 2 a.m., the power returned. Lights exploded back into existence. The pressure vanished. The apartment felt normal again. Too normal. Evan didn't move. Morning came. The city woke up. He stood in front of the bathroom mirror. His reflection appeared instantly. No delay. That was worse. The reflection leaned back when he leaned forward. Perfect timing. Too perfect. Outside, shadows clung too closely to people. On the news, an anchor paused mid-sentence and asked off camera, "Do I look right to you?" The broadcast cut. That night, the building lost power again. Just the building. The darkness arrived slowly this time, politely. It settled behind Evan like a breath held inches from his neck. "You don't have to disappear," the voice said inside his mind. "What do you want?" Evan whispered, to continue. Images filled his head. Him walking outside, smiling, talking, living, wearing his face. "I'll still be here?" Evan asked. A pause. Adjacent. The darkness didn't erase people. It archived them. Stored originals somewhere quiet while copies moved freely in the light. Evan returned to the center of his apartment, Saturday down. Turned off his phone, closed his eyes. He stopped imagining his face, stopped naming feelings, stopped thinking in words. The darkness hesitated, then folded inward, contained. Years later, the building is quiet. No blackouts, no reports. But sometimes, if you stand very still in the dark, you might feel someone holding it. So it doesn't wear your face next. The nights that followed were quiet, too quiet. Evan learned quickly that silence was no longer neutral. Silence meant observation without interruption. It meant the dark had time to replay what it had already recorded. His breathing, his posture, the way his shoulders tightened when he was afraid, the way his jaw shifted when he lied to himself. He stopped sleeping in his bedroom. The corners there felt wrong, like they remembered him too well. Instead, he slept on the living room floor with a single lamp turned on low, not bright enough to give the darkness edges, not dim enough to let it grow curious. He measured the light obsessively, adjusting it in millimeters, as if precision could keep him human. It worked for a while. During the day, the city pretended nothing had changed. People went to work. Traffic snarled. Coffee shops buzzed with tired conversations. But faces lingered half a second too long before expressions settled. Smiles arrived early. Blinks sometimes came late. Evan noticed things other people didn't want to notice. a woman on the bus whose reflection in the window was still looking forward while she turned her head, a child who waved at his father while staring directly at a shadow behind him, a man crossing the street whose shadow detached itself and lagged behind, stretching like it was reluctant to follow. The news avoided certain words. They called it post-outage stress, temporary perceptual lag, collective anxiety response. But Evans saw the cuts in the footage, the moments anchors stared too long into the camera, the way some interviews ended abruptly, as if something off-screen had leaned in too close. He stopped looking at mirrors altogether. Reflections had become negotiations. At night, he could feel it practicing again. Not voices this time. Movement. He'd lie still and sense the darkness shifting its weight, adjusting angles, rehearsing the way someone might roll over in bed, testing how much pressure it could apply before he reacted. Once, half asleep, Evan felt fingers brush his cheek. Not touching, measuring distance. He didn't flinch. The darkness paused, confused. That hesitation saved him. 3 days after the second blackout, the neighbor returned. She knocked once. Evan didn't open the door. "You can't avoid me forever," she said calmly through the wood. Her voice sounded clearer now, more complete. He cracked the door open just enough to see her. Her face was finished, too finished. Perfect symmetry, skin smooth to the point of artificiality. Her eyes reflected the hallway light in layered patterns, like mirrors inside mirrors. "It's getting better," she said, noticing his stare. "You taught it patience." Evan swallowed. "Why does it need faces?" "They're efficient," she replied. "Faces carry identity, memory, emotion, a shortcut to continuity." "Continuity of what?" She smiled, and it didn't reach her eyes. "Experience." She stepped inside. The shadows followed her like loyal pets. "You think you stopped it," she continued. "You didn't. You slowed it down." Evan backed away. "Then how do we end it?" Her expression softened, almost sad. "We don't." She gestured toward the window. The city lights flickered in the distance. Darkness existed before us. It will exist after. All we can do is teach it limits. That night, Evan dreamed of rooms again. Hundreds of them, each one dark. Each one containing a person sitting very still, eyes closed, breath slow. Anchors. Holding something heavy so the rest of the world could pretend nothing was wrong. Some of the people were old. Some were children. All were fading. When Evan woke, his mouth tasted like metal. The third blackout happened a month later. Not announced. Not sudden. The lights dimmed slowly, as if giving people time to be afraid. This time, Evan was ready. He sat in the center of his apartment, back straight, hands relaxed on his knees. No phone, no light. He emptied himself. The darkness arrived and stopped. It circled him, pressed close, waited for fear, for anger, for recognition. It found none. Minutes passed, then hours. When the lights returned, Evan didn't move. Days later, people began to forget small things. Street names, passwords, the order of childhood memories. Faces felt familiar without context, comforting without reason. Evan felt lighter each time it happened, thinner, like a copy made from a copy. Years passed, the city adapted. People avoided dark rooms instinctively, slept with low lights, learned, without knowing why, how to starve the absence. Evan stayed. He held it. Most nights, he barely remembered what his own face looked like. But the darkness stayed contained, restless, waiting. And sometimes, when you turn off the lights and feel watched, that isn't fear. That's someone else making sure it doesn't learn you next. Evan stopped counting time. Days and nights lost their edges when you spent most of them in the same dim room, breathing carefully, thinking carefully, existing carefully. Time, he learned, was another pattern the darkness liked. Repetition made things easier to wear. So he broke it. Some nights he stayed awake until dawn, eyes closed, body still. Other nights he slept for 12 hours straight, dreams blurring into waking thoughts. Sometimes he paced the apartment slowly, not enough to offer data, not still enough to be read as surrender. The darkness adjusted. It always did. He felt it press closer on nights when he remembered too much. Childhood memories were dangerous. Faces from the past carried detail, emotion, structure. Once, he tried to remember his mother's laugh. The darkness leaned in so fast, the air felt cold against his skin. He stopped. Let the memory dissolve. Outside, the city grew careful. People began leaving lights on overnight. Not bright, never bright, but soft, warm, constant. Buildings glowed faintly, like they were afraid of going completely dark. Stores sold out of nightlights within weeks. Nobody talked about why. Children adapted fastest. Evan noticed that. They learned not to stare too long into corners. Learned to keep moving without rushing. Learned that sometimes you shouldn't look directly at your own reflection, especially when it felt like it was waiting for you to notice. The news stopped reporting blackout incidents, not because they stopped happening, because people stopped calling them in. The neighbor visited less often. When she did, her face looked more human each time. Lines appeared around her eyes. A faint asymmetry crept into her smile. "It's learning restraint," she said once, standing just inside Evan's doorway. "That's new." "Is that good?" Evan asked. She considered the question longer than necessary. "It's safer." The darkness listened from the corners, always listening. One night, Evan made a mistake. He laughed. It was small, unplanned. A memory surfaced, something harmless, stupid, and a laugh escaped before he could stop it. The darkness reacted instantly. Pressure slammed into the room, bending shadows inward. The air thickened, heavy with attention. Inside his skull, a sensation bloomed. Not a voice, but recognition. Joy was rich with shape. Evan collapsed to the floor, forcing his face blank, his thoughts empty. "I'm sorry," he whispered, not knowing who he was apologizing to. The pressure eased, but something had changed. From that night on, the darkness grew bolder. It began offering things. Warmth when Evan shivered, comfort when exhaustion dragged at his bones. Once, when grief slipped through despite his control, he felt an arm around his shoulders. Not physical, conceptual, the idea of being held. "You don't have to do this alone," the voice said, gentle, perfectly tuned to his emotional frequency. Evan clenched his jaw. Companionship was another pattern, another trap. He refused it. Weeks later, the building across the street went dark. Just one building. Evan watched from his window as lights snapped off floor by floor. The darkness there moved differently. Faster. Hungrier. He felt it tug at him from across the gap, like a tide responding to the moon. Someone screamed. Then another. Then silence. By morning, emergency crews swarmed the place. People were let out wrapped in blankets, faces pale, eyes unfocused. Some smiled at nothing. Some stared at their hands like they didn't belong to them. Evan didn't go outside that day. That night, the darkness in his apartment felt heavier, impatient. "You can help them," the voice said. Evan didn't respond. "You already know how." It continued. "You understand balance. You understand restraint." Images flickered in his mind, him stepping into that other building, sitting, anchoring, containing what had grown wild. "You could save them," the darkness whispered. Evan opened his eyes. For the first time in months, he looked directly into the darkest corner of the room. "I am not your solution," he said quietly. The darkness recoiled, not in anger, in something like disappointment. The neighbor came the next day. She looked older now, tired. "It's spreading," she said. Not fast, but far. Evan nodded. It wants more anchors. Yes. And if I refuse? Her gaze dropped. Then it will find others who don't know how to say no. That night, Evan made a choice. Not to surrender, not to fight. To teach. He began leaving his apartment. Short trips at first, controlled movements. Neutral thoughts. He sat in dark places with others nearby. Subway stations, parking garages, empty theaters, and held stillness without fear. He starved the darkness while letting it observe limits. Sometimes he felt it pressing against him, frustrated. Sometimes curious, sometimes almost respectful. People around him calmed without knowing why. Blackouts became smaller, shorter. The darkness learned boundaries. Years passed. Evan's reflection grew unfamiliar. His face felt like something he borrowed temporarily. Names slipped away easily now. He rarely used his own. But the city slept better. The darkness remained, contained, and if you ever find yourself in the dark, heart racing, certain something is watching, slow your breathing. Don't panic. Don't offer it yourself. Because somewhere nearby, someone is already sitting very still, holding the shape of the dark, so it doesn't need yours. Evan knew when it was time to stop holding. Not because the darkness told him, because it stopped asking. The pressure that had once pressed against his thoughts softened. Nights passed where the corners stayed quiet, uninterested. The dark still existed, but it no longer leaned in. It no longer rehearsed. It had learned enough, or maybe it had learned restraint as far as it ever would. Evan's body felt lighter every morning, as if pieces of him were being gently set down somewhere else. He forgot dates first, then names. Eventually, even faces lost urgency. They felt optional. They didn't mind. Identity had weight. He had been carrying it for a long time. The neighbor visited one last time. She stood in the doorway, hesitant, as if unsure whether she was allowed to cross the threshold anymore. "You did more than anyone expected," she said. Evan studied her face. It looked human now, tired, real, imperfect in ways that mattered. "What happens to me?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. "The darkness doesn't erase," she said finally. "It preserves. You won't be gone, just quieter." Evan nodded. Quiet sounded like rest. That night, the city went dark one final time. Not a blackout, a choice. Lights dimmed gently, one by one, as people turned them off themselves. Windows glowed softly with lamps instead of harsh bulbs. Streets hummed, low and calm. The darkness settled over everything like a blanket, instead of a mouth. Evan sat in the center of his apartment. No fear, no resistance, no self left to imitate. The darkness approached and stopped. It recognized the boundary. For the first time, it did not try to pass through him. Evan closed his eyes. He didn't think about his face. He didn't think about his name. He didn't think at all. Morning came. The city woke. Life continued. People still felt watched sometimes, but the feeling passed if they stayed calm. Shadows behaved. Reflections obeyed. Names stayed attached to faces. In Evan's apartment, the lights never turned back on. No one noticed. Years later, the building was renovated. New tenants moved in, walls repainted, floors replaced. But the center of the living room was always left empty. Workers said standing there made them uncomfortable, like someone was already occupying the space, holding something delicate, something unfinished. And sometimes, late at night, if the power flickers and you feel the dark pause, that isn't danger. That's hesitation. That's the darkness remembering what it was taught, that not every shape needs to be worn, that not every face must be learned, and that some things remain human only because someone chose to let go.